أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله على رسوله المصطفى وخاتم النبيين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters. Today I'd like to speak about a topic which I believe is relevant to everyone. And what I mean by everyone is those who believe in Islam and those who don't believe in Islam. The topic which I want to talk about is related or revolves around the issue of language and the problems that come with language. The world that we live in is a world of words. We discuss our ideas and we discuss our thoughts using words and using concepts that we have. Now, one thing that we have to keep in mind, whether we are trying to discuss our own belief system or trying to engage with another person with regards to their belief system. So let's say we have a conversation with someone who doesn't share the same beliefs that we have. And we talk about sensitive topics, and this happens a lot nowadays. If you go on social media, you're always engaged in with talking with other people, and you're always in a state of commenting and even listening or watching videos from other individuals. Now, most of the people in the world, due to the globalization of the world, have become connected with one another without really being part of the same culture or the same mentality. And this is a challenge that came with modernity, with modernism. Following the Renaissance and following the Industrial Revolution, and the world moving towards a more globalized world. Back not too long ago, each community and each collectivity, each society lived in its own perimeter. And it was like that for thousands of years. Not much change would happen to one society. And even if some change does happen, the locality of the region, the perimeters of that region would allow a specific region to grow and thrive on its own. So every region had a set of values, a value system. Every region had its own culture. They had their own language. They had their own system of ethics and morality, and they had their own goals and objectives. But it was common to the area that they were living in. So a region that was in China, for example, would grow with a specific type of culture. And it wouldn't be influenced by, let's say, a region that was located in Europe at that time. A European city, let's say in France maybe, would have its own language. They would have their own norms. They have their own culture. They have their own understanding of the world. They have their own celebrations and so on and so forth. And this is not related to the region that was in China. So what happened now is that when the world opened up to each other, you suddenly have this dramatic change that occurred to the planet. You have cultures with a very different history and a very different background and a very different outlook on the world suddenly being able to connect with one another. They've suddenly become part of one global population, as they refer to it. And this created a lot of challenges, not just for religious individuals, but also for the secular societies. Even those who are the owners of corporations, big profit makers, they've also had this challenge because they have to deal with sending products to cultures and countries that are completely different, and they differ from one region to another. So let's say you have a product and you want to market it and sell it in the North American market. That would be very different than selling this product to a market, let's say in Europe or in India or in a country that's completely different than that market. So one attempt that was being made was to create this unified culture, and this would allow for them to be able to market products to individuals and use similar themes and similar marketing methods when trying to sell their product and to make profit out of them. Now, no one's able to completely eliminate this though, because culture is ingrained in a society, and it's been something that's been in the consciousness of a society for thousands and thousands of years. And what happens is that when we're able to communicate with one another, we realize that there's a lot of clashing with one another. Now, we might share the similar terms and concepts when we're talking to one another. We might be using the same words. So let's say English is a universal language now, and a lot of people are discussing things with using the English language online or in books or in articles or whatnot. Even though the language is the same, the understanding of the meaning behind the language is different. And this doesn't just occur between different cultures. And this also occurs within one specific society as well. So, for example, if we take concepts like happiness, and we want to analyze what happiness is, and we want to discuss what happiness is. If you come to making a proposition, and you say that the ultimate goal which a human being must seek is to achieve happiness in his life. And this is something where maybe everybody could agree on. Nobody would say that happiness is a bad thing. Nobody would say that happiness is something that I don't want in my life. I think humans in general could all agree to this proposition or this statement. And this isn't where the problem happens. On this level, everybody can communicate. A religious person, whether he was Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, and so on, they would say that happiness is an ultimate goal. You come to a secular individual or an atheist individual, and they would say, yes, happiness is an ultimate goal. Happiness is something that I want. I'm sure that most of human beings would agree to this. I'm not sure. I mean, there must be someone who doesn't agree with it, but I don't believe that their numbers are significant. Now, the statement is agreed upon. Where does the problem happen, or where does it occur? It occurs in the definition of these statements. If I come to this proposition, and I say that, let's say the ultimate goal is to achieve happiness, the questions we can ask is, what is happiness? And once you start asking these questions, you start seeing the differentiation between the individuals. So when the proposition was made, everybody seemed to be on one level. Everybody seemed to be in one circle, in one group. They were all unified. But when we come to the specific details of the proposition and the question, and we begin analyzing each term and notion on its own, suddenly this person who you were agreeing with seems to be on the opposite side of the spectrum now. You want to say, what is happiness? And then you would see the different answers. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Is happiness a state of mind? Is it a way of life? Is it pleasure? And what kind of life are you looking for? A life of goodness? Does a life of acquiring wealth, for example, yield happiness? What is your outlook on life? So this is another thing where you would differ. If you had a Christian looking at this question, a Christian might understand happiness as believing in Christ and living a devout Christian life, which would lead a person to heaven. And I'm speaking very generally here. I'm not trying to speak on behalf of anybody. So I'm just giving a general proposition without really dealing with these matters specifically. I'm just trying to deal with the issue of the proposition. A Muslim, on the other hand, might come and define happiness as submission to God and obeying God's legal rulings and following the laws of religion that were revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. An atheist might come and say, well, happiness is the gain of wealth, material gain, living a life of prosperity, living a life where I would make much more money than I would be investing in terms of time, and basically enjoying my time as much as I can on this world by maybe going vacationing, spending time with friends, buying large properties, whatever their definition of happiness is. So when it comes to the level of the details of a proposition, we begin finding people, even within one society, one collectivity, they start differing. And online you see a lot of people discussing things, and you think that everybody would agree, for example, that freedom is a wonderful thing, and liberty is a wonderful notion, equal rights for everyone. Everybody seems to agree with things like that. I don't think anybody, or at least, the majority of people would agree with the fact that human beings must have liberty to a certain degree. And human beings must have equal rights. And human beings must have freedom. We all agree to that. And when we have discussions with one another, or when we watch videos, we see that people are repeating these notions, repeating these propositions, repeating these ideas, and we connect to them. But then when it comes to the application of these issues and the details of them, we find ourselves different. So let's take the another proposition, religion and democracy, for example. Religion supports democracy. This is one proposition. Some people and a lot of Islamic scholars were pushing ideas like this, in their books, like religion supports democracy, religion supports, and obviously I'm not taking sides over here. I'm not saying whether the proposition is true or the proposition is false. I'm just saying that if we come to a proposition like that, or a proposition such as religion supports the notion of free speech, we have to, first of all, figure out whether the proposition is correct or incorrect in the first place. What does democracy entail? Let's say democracy, according to one individual, is the rule of man without the rule of God. That's not the definition of democracy, but I'm saying, let's say this is part of the definition that someone proposes. In someone's mind, democracy entails a system that does not have God in the equation. Then maybe in this instance, one would say that religion cannot support this kind of democracy, because religion does involve God in its own nature. You cannot remove God from religion. So the question itself, or the proposition itself, doesn't make sense. Now, if we go to the notion of free speech, for example, there's a book by an author named Timothy Garton Ash. And the title of the book is Free Speech, 10 Principles for a Connected World. And he tries to deal with the problem of free speech in a world of connectivity. This is very different when the world was not connected the way it is right now. You have online platforms, and a lot of the discussions that go on online, and we can see recently with the censoring of a number of individuals and the removing of certain types of content, this whole debate over free speech and what entails free speech and the right to free speech online is very different than what it used to be when there wasn't this connectivity in the world. So when he comes to the issue of free speech, and he discusses the understanding of free speech in religion, as opposed to the understanding of free speech outside of religion, in the liberal mentality, he says, and I quote here, "Moreover, religion sits uncomfortably with secular liberal arguments for freedom of speech, because it generally has a different relation to both freedom and speech. True freedom, it typically claims, is to be found not in the absence of external constraint, but in voluntary submission to a higher cause. The 17th century English Book of Common Prayer describes God as one in whose service is perfect freedom." And obviously here he's referring to mainly Christian understanding or dealing with the issue, but it doesn't really differ that much across religions. So freedom in the religious concept is freedom from sin. And the only way that happens is by submission to God. If you are a prisoner of your desires and your passions, and you're imprisoned in this world because of your attachment to material gains and materialism, then you're not really a free person. Even if on the outside, from as he describes here, the absence of external constraint, you're able to do whatever you want in society, and you're able to behave any way you want in society without harming any other individual. Even though you have that, religiously speaking, you're still not a free individual. You might have been freed from external constraint, but inside of you, you're still filled with that internal constraints. You've made yourself a prisoner to your passions and your desires. You made yourself a prisoner to your evil inclinations and moving away from God. And the only way you would free yourself is by attaching yourself to God, by detaching yourself from everything that has control over you other than God. So this is a very different notion of freedom. So you would have a religious person coming and discussing this online, or even conversation with one another, and you would both agree, whether you're a religious individual and the other side is someone who might not have this belief system. They believe in, let's say, liberalism or a different form of religion that has a different conception of what freedom is. So if you begin your conversation and you say, well, freedom is essential for all mankind, and that other person would agree with you. Yes, I agree that human freedom is essential for mankind. So you would think that the thing ends over there, but it doesn't. You would find that you were agreeing in principle, but you differ in your definition of what freedom is. And this is something that we have to keep in mind whenever we watch a video that pushes for a certain notion, that pushes for a certain concept or idea, something that, a video that promotes a method of life that brings prosperity for human beings. We have to analyze whether that perception of the goodness in life is something that would fit with our definition of it. A lot of the times there are things that call for the acquisition of material gains, and that would lead to happiness, or that having a specific job or living a specific lifestyle is what brings happiness and calmness to a human being. Well, it might do if we agree in that type of happiness. So let's say, someone might promote having, making a certain amount of wealth per year, and then owning a number of properties and whatnot. And this is the definition of the best life on earth. Well, that might not be taken into consideration that you're a person and you're a believer in God, and that you need some time also for your spirit and your soul and your worship. So that might not fit with your definition of what the best life on earth would be. So this is something that we have to keep in mind as well. Now, if we come to the issue of, let's say, gender identity, this is another issue which a lot of confusion happens, and I don't wish to discuss this in detail. But I would like to point out again that when it comes to defining what genders are, or gender roles, and we have a specific idea that's being imposed on another nation or another culture, well, a person has to ask himself, first of all, why should I agree with your understanding of what gender is? I mean, you're coming with a definition, with a specific background, and a specific understanding of what gender is, based on principles that you believe in. My understanding of the human being and of gender identity and gender roles differs with your definition of it. So we have to find a common ground. I would argue from, let's say a religious person believes that God is the one who decides what gender is. I'm not saying what that is, that this is the case. I'm just saying, imagine there's a person. Just let's make a proposition here. So this person says, well, God defines what gender is, or that gender is biological in nature. I don't believe in this idea of having gender being a social construct. This is based on postmodern philosophy, and I don't believe in postmodern philosophy. So you cannot come and try to impose this postmodernist philosophy, which doesn't have anything as criteria for judgment other than the feeling of the individual. This is absolute or ultimate subjectivity, basing the definition of notions on what a person feels. On the other hand, you might have Islamic or not even non-religious thinkers who don't believe that values should be based on the human emotion and human feeling. And then, because of that, everything is a social construct. Or a lot of these notions are social constructs. These are things that we make up in our minds, and they don't have an external reality. Another system of thought might believe that no, gender does have reality. Gender is biological, and it's not a social construct. And so they differ here in this aspect. Both of them believe in equal rights for everyone. Both of them believe that humans should not be persecuted or punished for or denied their basic rights as human beings. But what kind of rights are human rights? This is where the difference comes. And a lot of our difficulties when discussing these issues lay specifically in this point. That we don't, we end up talking with one another, and one person is talking in one area, and the other person is speaking in a different area. The foundations have to be discussed. The foundations is what has to be dealt with. So whenever a person approaches topics like this, or wants to engage in topics like this, then they must be aware of the underlying axioms or notions that are accepted before going into that kind of discussion. And this would resolve, I think, a lot of differences, or at least it would allow people to respect the two different opinions. This is my understanding of freedom, and I expect you to respect that, just as you expect me to respect your notion. But don't come and impose certain ideas on me. This has to be allowed. Humans should be allowed to really discuss ideas with one another, and not have one notion of freedom to be imposed on the other person. At the end of the day, dialogue and discussion is what should be promoted in a healthy manner. And nobody has to try to force his opinion on the other person, whether it was the religious individual forcing it on a non-religious individual, or the other way around. Everybody has a mind and a brain, and God gave everybody intellect. I think everybody has the ability to have a proper discussion, and they have the right to be respected and to engage with them in dialogue, even if we have a very different stance than they do. After Umar ibn Sa'd's army began to approach the Imam's camp, the Imam, at the moment of their when they were approaching, the Imam was sleeping, and he had a sword in his hand, and he fell asleep. Suddenly, the uproar of the army approached, and approached nearer and nearer. Sayyidah Zainab, Lady Zainab, alayhi salam, ran to her brother Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and she told him that the army is near. The Imam raised his head from his sleep, and he told her that I just saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in my dream, and he told me that I'm going to meet him very soon. During this time, Al-Abbas alayhi salam came to the Imam, and he told him that the army is very near, and they're almost reaching us. What do we do? The Imam told him, "O Abbas, go on your horse and ask them why have they launched the attack at this time." Abbas alayhi salam went to the enemy, and he had a number of soldiers with him, and he asked them the question, and they replied to him that we've received orders from the Emir telling us that you should either surrender immediately or we are going to fight against you. So the Abbas alayhi salam told them, well, don't be in such a hurry. Let me go speak with the Imam, and then I'll tell you of his position. When Abbas went to tell Imam Hussain alayhi salam of the matter, the companions remained over there to make sure that nobody comes, and that they engage in some sort of dialogue until Abbas comes with the news from the Imam. Imam Hussain alayhi salam told his brother, go back to them, and if it's possible, let us tell them to allow us to spend this night without battle, and that we start the battle the next day. The Imam wanted this because he wanted to spend the night in worship. This was the last night the Imam would have on earth. This is the last night that the Imam would spend with his family members. If he could gain one extra day, then that would be something to treasure and to cherish. So Al-Abbas alayhi salam goes to them and asks for this extension. And somehow they agree to it. The Imam at this time told his companions one more time. He said, you have another chance right now. Whoever doesn't want to fight with us can go back and take his family with them into safety. Nobody is forced to be with me, and nobody should feel bad for being here. The Imam alayhi salam, until the last moment, tried not to have anybody killed and always gave individuals the chance. Imagine at this time where every person that would remain with you would be a good addition to you, because that would extend your life, that would give you a higher chance of surviving a bit longer. But the Imam never looked at things this way. The Imam always gave the people the option. Since he left Mecca and Medina, throughout the whole way, he never told anybody to stay with him, and he never forced anyone to stay with him. He was always giving them the option of leaving and the option of going back. They spent the night in prayers and worship, and the next day, on the 10th of Muharram, the battle began. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to awaken our minds and our souls and our spirits, and to make us aware of the differences we have as human beings, to make us individuals who respect one another and be able to engage with others with respect and dignity and honor. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.